Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to call a meeting to order. And the first order of business is the presentation and acceptance of the minutes. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. We'll now turn the meeting agenda over to Janelle.
Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is the security listing, and this is from the time period of May 13th to July 5th, 2024. During that time period, we had total purchases of $844,500,000, and then we had redemptions of $1,139,500,000. During that time period, we had two securities called the Federal Home Loan. One was called on June 14th, and the other one is June 27th. And all the purchases are made according in compliance with our investment policy.
Is there a motion to accept the purchases and the sales? It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
It's moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Okay. The next item would be our swap profile as of June 30th, 2024. The fair market value of our swap with Goldman Sachs for the water utilities, $3,446,842. For parking, we had two swaps. Their total is $3,861,258. The total fair market value for this time period is $7,308,110 compared to our May amount of $7,343,771. The movement and our rate in May, it was 4.51% for the 10-year Treasury, and it dropped slightly to 3.36%. And we had no collateral posting during this time.
Are there any questions? Thank you.
The mayor's here.
Your timing's perfect. We're right here.
All right. Sorry about that, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Director. Next, we are moving to the presentation for the board's consideration and approval of citywide affordable housing TIF legislation.
Yes, thank you. The board approved the citywide affordable housing TIF concept at the May meeting, allowing the Department of Housing and Community Development to complete the TIF application. For this meeting, we had circulated the comprehensive plan detailed in the TIF application, which includes the program information, but-for tests, projected fiscal impact, public benefits, the risk to the city, and the bond financing analysis. This proposed TIF will be a part of the city's contribution to the overall $3 billion comprehensive public-private revitalization strategy to eliminate vacant and blighted properties in the city. Today, we're asking the board to approve the introduction of the ordinance to the City Council, which will create the development district and establish the bond issuance of amount of no more than $150 million. I would emphasize that at this point, we are only approving the legislation. When the legislation is approved, Treasury will return to the Board of Finance to approve the first bond tranche. We have prepared a PowerPoint presentation summarizing information circulated in the agenda packet. We have representatives from the Department of Housing and Community Development, Commissioner Alice Kennedy. We have our financial advisor, MuniCap, represented by Keenan Rice, and bond counsel McGuire Wood, lead attorney Alan Kaysen. I will turn over the presentation to Commissioner Kennedy and direct your attention to the PowerPoint.
Just one quick question. Is Commissioner Kennedy's presentation going to include the size and number of the tranches? No. Then how much is finance going to come back for in the first tranche? Is that known yet? You don't know yet?
No.
Okay, all right, thank you.
It's going to be essentially 300 homes will come.
Turn your mic on.
Sorry, apologies. I've spent a lot of time reading these documents, and Commissioner Kennedy might correct me, but I think the first tranche will be, will represent 300 homes? Yes.
Okay.
Here, I might as well go ahead and make my way up here. So good afternoon, members of the board, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Comptroller as well. So to ask the question, it is not uncommon when doing a TIF to not know exactly what the first tranche will be, whatever TIF that is. We have modeled, and MuniCap has modeled the potential that the first tranche would roughly be in the 20 million range to support around 300 properties, but it is not uncommon to not know exactly until we get closer to that point. Things might change. We might be a little bit more, we might be a little less, but that's where we are with that.
That would represent close to $600 million in outside funds. $20 of funds for every dollar of TIF.
Yep. So I think we will we'll get the presentation up on the screen. Excellent. So we'll go to the first slide, but I do want to also say that I know Janelle mentioned that we have Keenan Rice. We also have Max Levy here from MuniCap with us in person, Alan Kaysen, and as well as our city bond attorney, Joanne Levin, and Stacy Freed, who is the executive advisor to the commissioner at DHCD, who's been the point person with my staff on moving this forward. So next slide. Overall, the requested action that we're asking of you here this afternoon is to consider and approve the enclosed resolution authorizing the introduction of an ordinance to City Council regarding the citywide affordable housing tax increment financing. It would create the citywide affordable housing development district, and it would also authorize the issuance of no more than $150 million of special obligation bonds. So next slide. As we've all mentioned and we presented in the first presentation around the concept of this, we have a problem in the city of Baltimore. People are understanding and recognize that there's a significant number of vacant properties. The significant number of vacant properties, as you can see on the map here, is concentrated in very specific areas of Baltimore City. Majority of these areas are lower income, black communities in that kind of black butterfly, if we were to use that terminology that was coined to kind of describe those areas of disinvestment across the city. As of this afternoon, we were at 13,233 vacant buildings in the city of Baltimore. That continues to be a significant decrease, and we've been seeing a decrease happen around, that's a 16% decrease actually since Mayor Scott has taken office. The one piece of this work that is one of the most difficult things, and we have a number of properties out there that are sitting with developers, our nonprofit partners, our community development corporations that are ready, willing, and eager to do this work, but there needs to be some assistance to close that appraisal gap. It's something that is recognized. So, construction, using rough numbers, construction might cost $200,000. Post-construction appraised value might be $150,000. So there's that delta of that gap there, which is where we need to know that being able to close that will make us be able to do this work and do it fast and quickly and at a scale that the city has not seen before. But the need is great, and the need is now. In December of 2023, we can go to the next slide. Mayor Scott, along with partners from BUILD and the Greater Baltimore Committee, announced, a financial capital plan that would help address this housing crisis and the vacant and abandoned properties and lots and the disinvestment in our city, and to do this at scale over a 15-year time frame. One of the biggest things that we've talked about over the many years has been how are you able to turbocharge this work? What is needed to be able to move this faster and at scale? We've been having great success. As you know, we've had that, what I just mentioned, we were at the lowest number of vacant buildings that we have been in decades, and we've been doing that, with work and with limited funds available. So the additional funds would allow us to be able to make an impact, a great impact, and look to end the vacant housing crisis over the 15 years. So it would start with a public investment in 37,500 must-dress properties with additional public investment to get to 45,000 as needed. We're using a whole blocks and whole neighborhoods approach. So in 2019, the Department of Housing and Community Development released its Community Development Framework. In the Community Development Framework, we focused on geographic areas of the city that had high levels of vacant properties. We use data as a driving force in this. Data is something that we use at DHCD and take very seriously. So the impact investment areas were chosen based off of high levels of vacant properties, vacant lots, but also having strong community assets within the community development that was already happening and strong community neighborhoods. So we really look at this as creating whole block outcomes on these communities. So it's both sides of the street, corner to corner, and ensuring that all vacant properties and vacant lots are taken care of in that, while also making sure that we're also addressing our existing residents as part of this as well in the work that we're doing. We're generating a minimum of $3 billion of public investment over 15 years. And, we're looking to utilize different components to do that and want to make sure that we also can create and strive and move new industries and workforce development, which will have exponential impacts on our city. So if you go to the next slide.
Commissioner, before you go to the next slide, all through the presentation, numbers are changing, like unit numbers, et cetera. And so on here, when you talk about the 37,500, it really doesn't say if it includes the 13 that we know that is vacant, even though on another slide we see that the city owned like 4,300 of those numbers. I just believe as you go forward in the presentation, some of those numbers have to be clarified.
We can do that easily, and I appreciate the feedback, Mr. Williams.
While we're paused then, before we move past the page that we were just on, I just want to make sure when you say generating a minimum of $3 billion in public investment through a combination of city, state, and innovative private investment, you really mean $3 billion total in public and private investment.
That's
okay.
$3 billion total of, that is $3 billion total of public investment as well as strategic private investment of $300 million. That does not take in consideration the exponential amount of additional private investment that is on top of the $3 billion that is generated and happening within.
Because the market just gets better.
Because the market.
Okay. But it generates, that does include what Mr. Meyer was talking about earlier, where each dollar of TIF is leveraging $20 of private investment.
Right.
Of some type of, but wait a minute, the numbers you just cited, sorry.
That's okay.
The numbers you've just cited, the 300 million in particular, is only for the initial program, which is 1,650 houses. They're slightly less than half of the entire project, which is 3,500 houses. So we're talking about apples and oranges here.
I think let's try to back up a little bit on the description of this. So the $3 billion public and private investment is a very specific capital stack that covers $300 million investment from the city, a $900 million investment from the state,
Well, that was 750 before.
750 to 900. We have a couple of
Yeah.
different components on that, and then $300 million in private and philanthropic investment.
Correct. But to my point, that is only 1/2 of the $3 billion requested.
Yes, it is,
And that represents, if it's $800,000 per house, which is what that works out to, that's only half of the program.
well, out of the $3 billion investment, and I also have further information on this, out of the total $3 billion financial capital stack for the work, there's $1 billion of the $3 billion that is also specified for infrastructure work across the city for our neighborhoods. So that work won't be, some of those funds are not tied directly to a specific property, but also includes infrastructure work as well.
To the controller's comment, I think you need to sharpen up those numbers so that we understand exactly the breakdown.
So, I'm sorry, did you just said that of the 3 billion, 1 billion is infrastructure for the neighborhoods, in which 1.5 billion of the combined money is being spent actually renovating houses? Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Michael, do you want to make a comment? I'm going to add in that.
Good afternoon, everyone. Michael Moxton, Director of Finance. Good to see you again. I wanted to just help a little bit with those numbers. So the $3 billion is the greater vision that this TIF is a part of. That is what it will take to fully solve vacancy in the entire city of every kind, with everything that it takes, including fixing houses, but also preventing houses from falling into vacancy, also fixing lots, and of course, infrastructure. The way the TIF plays into it is it's really the kickstart. It's the first step. The TIF represents $150 million. It is designed to stand on its own. That $150 million gets at a little bit over 4,000 properties. And those 4,000 properties are strategically located next to areas of strength so that they can be the places from which we expand into the rest of the community. So the TIF is really that first spark. It goes hand in hand with the state commitment. The state commitment is already at a minimum $750 million based on what's already in state law. We actually believe that can be leveraged further without significantly changing existing law, but that's a larger discussion. This is just the first $150 million, just the first 4,000 properties.
Okay.
I thought it's 300,000 per house, isn't it? Well, I don't know where I got that number, but the renovation is 300,000 per copy.
The TIF is going to vary from property to property, but that doesn't quite
on average.
The 300,000 sounds more like the value of a typical house once it's all done.
Yeah.
The actual TIF is just plugging the assessment
But
gap.
How much is it going to cost per house?
On average, about 50,000
That's
50,000.
that's the
50,000.
TIF.
For the
That's
TIF.
for the TIF.
That's,
How much per copy per house? I thought I found a number of 300,000, maybe I'm inaccurate.
I don't remember seeing the 300.
also, if it's 50,000, if the TIF is going to provide $50,000 in rehab subsidy per house,
Yeah.
then $150 million of TIF is 3,000 properties, not 4,000 properties.
Yep. So,
Yeah, it's actually, if you go to one of Mr. Rice's exhibits, buried deep in here, he shows 3,500 houses, if my math is correct, or 3,600 divided by 3.5 billion. And so those numbers, which jive with page 44, show that the program is around $800,000 per house, unless I'm, well, here,
no, I'm looking at page 44.
yeah,
What other page are you?
That page 40, well, then you got to go way to the back. It's in the fine print. Jeez.
I think we're doing the commissioner.
Should we let her go to the next page?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, here we go.
What-
It's in Schedule 2.
Schedule 2.
God, it's page 2 of Schedule 2, projected construction completion, and it shows the number of units, which at the end of the program is, according to this, 3,500. These are Mr. Rice's numbers, not mine.
What I
Here,
would,
I'll show you.
what I would recommend that we do as a board is let the commissioner go through her presentation.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
And also believe that when it really comes to the numbers, if Mr. Rice would also address some of the questions as it relates to the numbers, I think it'll be a little more continuity in understanding everything that's being said.
So we also believe that, because the schedule that you were just talking about with the math there that will come out to 800,000, that was looking at $3.5 billion, only utilizing 3,500 properties, but the $3.5 billion covers 37,500 properties. So
It's not what it says, but anyway, all right.
okay, we'll go back.
Which page are you
Madam
looking
Commissioner,
at?
just continue with your presentation.
Yeah.
We'll ask all the questions we need to ask.
So we're moving on now to the example of the properties that would actually be included in the TIF district itself. So to create the TIF district, this is based off of property address. So other TIFs that have come before you have had a very specific geographic map. The most recent that we've worked on has been the Perkins Somerset Old Town, with a very geographic component to that and number of properties. What we've done is we've looked at the same kind of underlying data. One of the things that sets us apart as a city is that we actually know exactly where the vacant buildings are and the vacant lots. Other cities actually are still grappling with how to figure out where they are and located and what to do with them. So we have 4,285 properties currently that are part of the proposed TIF district. Out of that, 1,299 are currently city-owned right now. 1,624 are in our impact investment areas, and the additional properties are located in our areas that are other geographic areas of focus that we've worked on in collaboration with our communities as well as the state and so forth. These are areas of high vacancy rates. These are also areas where we know that it will generate the increment needed to pay the debt service. And as we said, we're leveraging additional investment and also achieving whole block outcomes. So overall, in terms of the policy goals of this TIF, we're looking at equitable neighborhood development. That is one of the priorities of the administration, one of the priorities of the Department of Housing and Community Development moving this forward. We are looking to invest in communities that have long been disinvested in, where they have been suffering for years with blight and experiencing, blight, levels of high crime, other mental as well as physical health ailments. We want to make sure that we expand the resources for the community development. We're going to be providing opportunities for our small, emerging, minority and women-owned businesses within the communities. We're supporting our violence reduction initiatives. We're growing the city's population. We're also at the time increasing our city's tax base, and we're creating the sustainable and healthy communities. So when we talk about the source of funds, previous.
It's good.
Oh, no, yep, next time, sorry. When we talk about the sources of funds, we're talking about, the city's contribution to the vacancy reduction initiative. We're looking at a maximum here of $150 million in TIF bonds sold over 15 years. And at this time, we are leveraging with the what we see as a minimum commitment that of what is currently committed of a $750 million state commitment. The uses on the funds would would allow us to provide housing construction support for those specific properties to do the renovations up to 115% of area median income. And it would also give us the ability to look at some of the vacant lots where we have new construction projects coming online as well for the new construction public infrastructure that's needed for those. So in terms of the use of the TIF funds, we have the appraisal gap, what we described before in terms of covering the cost of rehabilitating the property and the sales price. The city charter allows the TIF proceeds for this TIF to be utilized for affordable housing for incomes up to 115% of area median income. Will help close that appraisal gap, will support the infrastructure, and the majority of the funds are actually used for creating that affordable housing for the programs. So the bond, financing analysis, this gives a snapshot here in the presentation based off of the significant analysis that was included in the TIF application. We have the $150 million in terms of the total bond proceeds. We know that we would net out about $130 million. We also have the debt reserve fund and some insurance costs. So we end up being able to utilize the entire $150 million. One of the things is that this is really starting to look at, on the next slide, moving forward in terms of, as Director Moxon stated, these initial vacant rehabilitations that are, funded by the state, the private market, and the Department of Housing and Community Development. Recently, we submitted our, information to the state for the state funding for this next, what we're doing in the fiscal year, and it all ties together in terms of the work that we've already been doing in the agency through acquisitions. We have the city-owned properties that we own now. We have the acquisitions that are underway through different means, which are included as properties in the TIF district. And these would help us do those initial rehabilitations and move that forward. So the initial vacant rehabilitations that happen with the bond proceeds would allow us to secure kind of those phase 2 of the vacant rehabilitations, and then we have, through phase 2, will then provide the tax increment that's needed for phase 3 and et cetera moving forward. So in terms of the but-for test here, I was going to ask if Keenan, if you would come up and talk a little bit about the but-for analysis.
Good afternoon. My name is Keenan Rice. I'm the president of MuniCap. MuniCap is the city's financial advisor for TIFs. So one of the city's TIF policies is that we always need to show that there's a need for the public investment to accomplish the goals. And so the way we do that is through a but-for test. Now, a but-for test, we look at both a qualitative test and a quantitative test. A qualitative test is we look at factors, which in this case is easy because for decades we've had these properties that haven't been, that have been vacant, haven't been redeveloped. But we also look at the quantitative test, which is what do the numbers tell us, okay? And what we call the but-for test is the same thing Commissioner Kennedy has referred to as the appraisal gap. And what that means is the cost of renovating or building these new units is higher than what people can afford to pay for them, what the market will bear as far as the price. So we've looked at this and on this but-for analysis, and so we start with, under the TIF, we can only spend up to 115% of area and median income. The person who's buying the house is limited to that. Everyone's not going to be at 115% of area and median income, so we used an average of 100% of the area median income for a 4-person household. The area median income is adjusted for the number of bedrooms based on the size. So we looked at that, 100% of the area median income, it's $118,300 per year. We adjust that to a monthly income, and from that we can calculate how much that family can spend on a mortgage and how much they can spend on total debt. So using statistics on the typical amount of debt, was actually starting with the ratios. Different underwriting agencies such as VA and FHA have ratios on how much someone can spend, how much of their income can go to their mortgage versus how much can go to total debt. So for example, a person can spend 31% of their income on their mortgage and 43% on total debt. Okay, so
Can I pause you for just a second?
Sure.
I'm sorry. I'm realizing that what was confusing me was I'm used to looking at area median income to determine what percentage of area median income people are at to qualify for various programs in housing in the city. But you're appearing to actually use the area median income. So I think we need to be a little bit more explicit about what area has the annual median income of $118,300 for a four-person household.
So we use the same criteria that the city uses in implementing their various affordable housing programs. I believe it's the city of Baltimore. Is that correct?
Well, no, it's the state.
Yeah.
The state.
That's
Charter.
that's the great, like, that's the expanded greater Baltimore surrounding counties.
Okay.
Annual median income. That's not the annual median income of the people who actually live inside Baltimore City already.
Right.
So this assumes that the average buyer for these houses is someone who makes this much money and probably currently lives somewhere outside Baltimore and is moving into Baltimore. I just want to be clear about that.
Right.
This is not what these are. So this does not adjust is not the right word. This is not projecting existing Baltimoreans are buying most of these houses.
Well, there's a separate analysis that looks at who's buying the houses, and it's both people in the city and, we want to keep people from moving out of the city. People are looking for, quality affordable housing. This is specifically the but-for analysis. We're estimating how much people can spend on a house, and we used 100% of the area median income. But your point's a good point. 100% median income for the state of Maryland is higher than what you would see as the median income in the city of Baltimore.
Okay.
And I think, just to add into what the comptroller is saying, I think, and Commissioner, you know this best from some of the work that has happened and it was actually leads into my question, Mr. Comptroller, in West Baltimore, for example, where we have been able to have people, you and I were there together, not too far from the highway to nowhere, who weren't making this much money, be able to buy and purchase a home there. But I think, Madam Commissioner, for the other members of the board that are not the comptroller and I, who know very deeply the appraisal gap and the issues around the appraisal gap, I think, and how this will help, one, I would ask you to just take a moment to give some examples of how we've had to do that and how much has had to go into those in order to make these projects work, and how we're going to make sure, as a comptroller, and I, we'll be asking you about this, the entirety of at least our portion of this being implemented, how we're going to focus in on those people, right? Whether it's in Johnson Square, where we were a few days ago with another development, about making sure that residents in the city who make, half that, if that, are able to purchase these homes in addition to the issues with the appraisal gap.
Yeah. So I think one of the ways to there are a couple of different ways to describe that, and as Keenan said, that is the example for the but-for. We know that the majority of people that are going to be purchasing properties are not going to be at 100% area median income, which is also why we've utilized an average of $50,000 as the investment into the property from the TIF. It is not that we're saying that every property is going to get $50,000. We know that some properties, the appraisal gap might be higher. We know that some properties, the appraisal gap might be lower. We also know that there's a level here of what we're trying to do in order to create affordable options. This is an up to, this is an up to amount. And that appraisal gap will also, change based off of the projected person of income. So we have some properties, an example I'll use is the 800 blocks of Harlem and Edmondson, which is a good example. Those properties all in were coming, when we first looked at doing this, the cost of those, they were coming in at $290,000, which actually of construction costs for those properties. These are somewhat on the larger side. They're 3 stories. So it's a much larger, product. And those came in after inflation. So when the first kind of estimates for those projects occurred back in 2019, that was pre-COVID, pre-inflation, pre-hike of construction costs. In order to meet the goals that we had within the community, we've ended up actually putting in $70,000, $75,000 per property on that in order to get the sales price down to a point where they could be affordable for the residents. We've actually worked with the Community Association, with Upton Planning Council, with Miss Wanda, and found the appropriate buyers that would be able to come in and meet kind of the 80% area median income range in order to purchase that with a larger investment from the city in terms of being able to make that happen and go towards those construction costs. Another example would be with our community land trusts. Our community land trusts also are in this. They see appraisal gap components all of the time because they also know what they're looking to sell the property at in order to meet some of our lower area median income at the 50% AMI range and so forth. Those typically, sometimes the investment in those properties to meet that 50% of area median income, which is what we use, as a standard, we use the 50% of area median income based off of the state tables that are created. We don't have a separate Baltimore City specific that we use. We've never done that in any of our programs. So our Affordable Housing Trust Fund, our developer incentives, everything uses the kind of state affordability. So I just wanted to put that out there too. That's why it is based off of that. So when we have our community land trust, the investment there is higher. So we might be coming in at $100,000 to make that work. We just had another property through our other developer incentive program that is smaller and funded with some of the ARPA dollars. They're coming in, they needed to basically make the math work and get us over the hump $30,000 or $25,000. So the range of investment could be as low as $20,000 into a property. It could be as high as $100,000 into a property that will help us meet the goals for that specific group of properties, for that specific level of affordability, et cetera.
You've just touched on what I think is my question for Keenan, which is, so is there a sensitivity analysis for your but-for test that shows that range? Because just showing this of how it works, assuming area median income, if you just sort of say very generally, well, some will be less than that and some will be more than that, the reality is we have data that shows what city residents actually have to spend. So we could see one end of that sensitivity analysis by using the area median income for Baltimore City. At the point where you're talking about above the area median income as a possibility where some might need more and some might need less, I find it difficult to envision scenarios where properties need significantly less subsidy than what this would provide. So I don't know that there is much more. I guess my point is, and I'm intuitive, which is why I'm asking if have there been any calculations done. This feels like the high end of an actual sensitivity analysis, not the average. And could you do a real one?
I just want to step in real quick, and then Keenan can answer that. I just want to remind that for all of the programs and all of the funding that we're leveraging this with, all of our existing Baltimore City programs, we use the state tables for income and area median income. We would not be doing this program based off of Baltimore City specific area median income from from the operations aspect of the
Right,
program.
and that was my initial confusion. I get that, because we're both really used to using the area of median income to talk in terms of will somebody, how many people will qualify for some arbitrary percentage of this that the federal government has set for their rules. But we're not talking about rules in this regards. We're just talking about actual market numbers. So that's where, and I should preface this by saying, I mean, I'm a huge believer in community development, and I'm sitting here looking at these numbers and thinking of the time I spent in community development and how much I know you need in subsidy per house. I mean, I love the fact that at least now it's got a fancier name, appraisal gap. We used to just call it subsidy, because we knew it cost this much to build the house, but when it was done, you could only sell it for this much. You needed subsidy. We need an appraisal gap. I get that. I am not against trying to fill that appraisal gap. What I am concerned about is I don't want to mislead the public into thinking that we don't need as much money as we really do, or conversely, that the number of houses we're actually going to get is more than it really is. And by the way, along those lines, as someone who was, and you were there too, part of the fight to get what seemed like a huge amount of money out of the state to rebuild all of our public schools, only to find out that that $1 billion that was going to rebuild all of our public schools was really just phase one and got us 15 or something like that. That's
28, but yeah.
Well, no, that includes the second. That includes part of the second phase too. Yeah, but I mean, my point is that I understand that we need to be positive when we're talking about something like this, and we need to get people to feel rah-rah about it. But I think some of the confusion in the early questions was coming from the fact, for example, that when you're talking about $3 billion worth of investment, well, really $1 billion of that is infrastructure, and the infrastructure investment isn't going just to the individual houses that are being renovated, but is fixing up whole neighborhoods, which is a good thing, and the public should want that, and that's wonderful. But when you just divide that by the 4,285 specific houses that you're talking about in the presentation, somebody with a calculator says, wow, we're going to be spending $700,117 per house, which is not true. But I'm just saying, let's just try to I just want these numbers to be real. I'm not saying I don't want to do this, just I want to do this with real numbers.
It just seems to me on this one presentation, we may be missing that this is just part of the TIF test. So what it says to me is more than aggressive, this presentation is conservative by starting out with the higher number. The numbers that where we're really going to is, to me, deeper in the presentation. I think on this slide, it is just showing, again, the but-for test.
So you're both making very good points. Okay, you're exactly right. You're also exactly right. The purpose of this analysis was to show...
Mr. Rice.
The purpose of the but-for analysis is to show we need public investment, even if we're optimistic, which I agree with you, we are. 100% median income is really much more than that for City of Baltimore residents. But even if we make that, I think, kind of aggressive, optimistic assumption, We still need public investment, and I think that gets to your point, because we were trying to say we need.
No one can argue against this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, but I think to the comptroller's point, though, I think, Mr. Comptroller, I'm thinking about for you and I, not the other members of the board, on what will ultimately be the political discourse side about this. We need that kind of separate analysis that talks about, like, we need those examples of what is gonna look like, right? Go back and plug in examples from Harlem and Edmondson or 2600 Loyal Northway and all of these places that we've been able to bring back from decades of vacancy with folks who were the victims, so to speak, of that vacancy in those very neighborhoods. I think that's the kind of conversation that we're going to need to show to people in the public, because we have to make it real for them that, like, yes, if you have been living in West Baltimore and earning $40,000, $50,000 a year, this is also for you.
Yes.
Tell people we're building 1,000 houses when we only have the resources to do 500. That would be terrible.
So we can very easily, the model is set up so that we can plug in different levels of median income. And in fact, we actually did that because part of our discussion was what level of median income should we assume. And so obviously when you start getting into 80%, 60%, 50% median income, the appraisal gap goes up very significantly. But we can easily do that. And that probably does, in fact, not probably, it does paint, I think, a more realistic picture. And that also means, and we've had this conversation, that the TIF dollars probably aren't going to improve as many homes. We contemplate supplementing the TIF money from other money. That was an important part of the analysis. Because again, one of your policies for TIFs is to leverage TIF dollars with other money. Okay, so we know, that's part of the plan, is to leverage and bring in other money to support and supplement the TIF money. And that's what's going to be really critical to get these homes, to meet the goals we have. The TIF's not going to get us there. It's just seed money that helps us leverage other money.
Yeah, I would just add to that, to the comptroller's point too, that the 100 and we're talking about $150 million of a $3 billion plan. So
I suspect, well, first of all, I should ask the question, if $1 billion is for infrastructure and $1.5 billion is for housing rehab, what's the other $500 million?
No, the other half, it is also housing rehab. So it covers new construction, property maintenance of vacant lots, and that's included in infrastructure as well.
I had $300 million from city, $900 million from state, and $300 million from private and philanthropics. That was $1.5 billion. Mm-hmm. And I have $1 billion for infrastructure.
Right.
So what's the other $500 million?
The other $500 million is for those other.
No, I mean, where's it coming from?
That is a further, I'll turn over to Michael. He does a great job of explaining the future level of the investment.
Absolutely. Just wanted to clarify for the board, money in versus money out. As far as where the money into the program is coming from. Mr. Comptroller, you're absolutely right in getting up to the $1.5 billion, $300 million city, $900 million state, and $300 million in philanthropic. Mm-hmm. That is what we have been able to solidify so far in our projections. It's a 15-year plan. It's $3 billion is the goal. $1.5 billion we have various routes to, and the back $1.5 billion comes from rethinking our public-private relationships, rethinking how we handle other parts of our tax base. Some of this is aligned with our strategic 10-year plan work in the city. That's the money in. The $1 billion in infrastructure is the money out. So that $3 billion that we are looking to raise, we are looking to spend approximately $1 billion on infrastructure and approximately $2 billion on the houses themselves.
So we're going to spend another $500 million on housing rehab besides the 393. We're going to spend another $500 million. Michael, I want to be very tactful about this.
Please.
I did not hear in the words you said where that other $500 million is coming from. If it's not coming from the city, the state, private and philanthropic sources, where else might money come from?
Sure. Okay. I will kind of caveat this as saying that these are things that we are working on. But there are two things that are very top of mind for me for where the money might come from. One is that when we compare the city of Baltimore to other jurisdictions, other big cities around the country, there are certain things that other big cities are doing that we are not doing. And one really big glaring part of it is that the city of Baltimore does not receive a penny of the sales tax that is collected within our borders.
So that would be, theoretically, it would be money coming from us, but that assumes that we can talk the state into letting us collect more revenue.
That is one approach.
Got it.
That is one approach. Another approach is the federal government. We are working very closely with our federal partners right now. You'll notice the federal government is not
on the list.
Is not yet on the list,
Okay.
and we think there are a lot of opportunities with federal programs. So, yeah.
Mike, Mr. Director, can you just, for the other members of the board, just very briefly, you mentioned it for the comptroller, talk to them about what percentage of big cities actually keep part of their state sales tax?
Absolutely, Mr. Mayor. Of cities of more than 200,000 residents, which there are about 120 in the country, they're all similar to us in one way or another, 89% of those cities have some version of sales tax that goes back to them that they then use to fund their operations. And 59% get more than 2 percentage points of that sales tax. To be very transparent, when I first heard from Mr. Mayor that he was interested in talking to me about coming down to Baltimore, I did a whole bunch of research on Baltimore, and it was glaring to me the absence of the sales tax in the city. I had never seen another city without a sales tax revenue. It is extremely unusual. The other cities that are our peer cities have been able to plug exactly this gap exactly with a sales tax. That's not the only way there, but it was in many ways the most obvious way there.
Okay. Then at the risk of making a marketing suggestion, I think this conversation might be less potentially confusing if we just focus on the housing rehab and we just, for now, focus on what we have relatively firm projections on how we're going to pay for it. So if we're just talking about the $1.5 billion where we have projections for how it's going to be spent, we should just be talking about how many houses are we trying to rehab with these resources.
Absolutely.
Is that reasonable?
I think that's reasonable, and I want to just kind of clarify that ultimately we're talking about the legal construct for the TIF, which includes a set of addresses, and that's the 4,000 or so homes that are listed here. Yeah, so that is what we would like to put in front of the board, and very happy to kind of limit the conversation to those 4285.
And before we leave that particular section of the topic, again, to be clear, the $900 million that we're projecting from the state and the $300 million that we're projecting from private and philanthropic sources, that is all going to individual home rehab, and none of that is also going to infrastructure? Yeah, there we go. Okay.
Well, so the 300,000 and the 900,000 is going to rehab, as well as demolition, stabilization, also potential different levels of vacant lot maintenance, and potential other components on it. So all in, and I think this is where, we came here today to talk about the very first piece of the city's commitment as part of a proposed $3 billion capital stack. And the the proposed $3 billion capital stack that the mayor worked with the Greater Baltimore Committee and so forth is a commitment to cover the total of 37,500 properties up to.
Wait, where did 36?
Just the $3 billion. The three.
Oh, for all the neighborhoods.
Okay. We are here today to talk about the first part of the city's commitment as part of a $3 billion proposed capital stack, right? And in that, we are here to talk specifically about the $150 million proposed TIF with the TIF district that covers the 4,285 properties. Those 4,285 properties are a subset and are included in the 37,500 properties that is the commitment over 15 years that we will address using a proposed capital stack of $3 billion. So the TIF is the first. The TIF is the first piece of the city's commitment. And this is one reason why we're here today and why we had the meeting. We've been prepping and working on it because the state has showed up with their first part of their commitment, which is the
$50 million.
$15 million a year.
Well, we've seen this year.
Well, it's actually, there is no, it's been legislated that it is incorporated every year.
But I mean, the check came, we got the money.
No, so we haven't gotten the money yet, but we've provided all of the, we meet weekly with Secretary Day, and we know exactly what properties are on the list. We have a comprehensive list and plan.
I trust the secretary, and I trust the governor.
Yes.
I was going to say, you're right, that was inaccurate. I trust this secretary, and I trust this governor. But I don't trust Maryland to always give us this secretary and this governor.
I can understand that. But this is also why we're talking about the city's commitment
to do what we can.
To do what we can, which is authorizing up to, remember, it's not even, it is up to a $150 million a vacancy reduction of affordable housing TIF, which is what we're asking the board to consider today, is, authorizing and approving that, ordinance for introduction, to city council, which would give us the ability to approve up to $150 million to support the work. And that $150 million over 15 years will cover, the 4,285 properties.
Mr. Vice Chair, you had something.
I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Is that it?
No, well, we have more. I didn't know if you had any other questions on the but-for. We can go to the next.
I have some questions, but.
Oh, yes.
Not about this.
Okay.
Why don't you finish your presentation?
Right.
We can go into the next questions.
I think we went through this already.
We did. This is the.
There we go.
The sample.
The appraisal gap of 358,000. That's what I was looking for. Okay. I got you. All right.
So we have that information, and actually, somehow I have.
Yeah, but that is
misplaced.
This divided by this.
Yeah.
No, not that is. That's not 150 million of TIF divided by this. It's 300 million from the city and 900 million from the state divided by this.
So, what we've done is also provide the sample of the TIF rehabilitation project, which we went through here in terms of total to renovate per unit, sales price, et cetera, and what that appraisal gap would be. And then the fiscal impact analysis as well, which looked at what the, real property tax increment revenues are estimated at. And then this is, just to be also very clear, the fiscal analysis that you see here as part of this and then what's on the screen, this is a fiscal impact analysis. This is not representative of the sources that are used to repay the bonds. So it looks at a broader fiscal analysis for the city. So it looks at income tax revenue and transfer tax recordation and revenues, et cetera. Those revenues are not used to repay the bonds. The revenue that is used to repay the bond is the revenue from the tax increment on the properties.
This is a question, and I think technically this might be for finance, and on some level this is a standing issue with TIFs. That historically the finance department has always sort of looked askance at TIFs because it captures a specific chunk of revenue and diverts it to a specific purpose, and philosophically the BBMR is opposed to that concept. But that's okay. I can live with that. What I think we do need to understand, though, is in the past that reticence has regularly been overcome by saying this is just a defined specific area that we're talking about, whereas this non-contiguous TIF is, the impacted properties are spread out. And so here's my specific question. When we'll just say the finance department, when the finance department projects tax base and revenue going forward, right now, absent anything like this, do they assume that vacant houses will stay vacant? Or do they assume some amount of development and improvement in neighborhoods? Because depending on what they already assume, if they do assume some, then some of what we would be doing is eating already projected revenue that was going to go to other things. If they take a very conservative approach and don't assume that any vacant properties are going to get occupied and put back on the thing, then this is golden. Then this is all new money, right? But I don't know.
Right. Okay. That's actually a very straightforward question to answer. The Department of Finance projects revenues based on historical trends. And one of the things that is unique about this TIF, like you said, it's not geographic, but the fact that it's not geographic doesn't mean that it's just everywhere and anywhere. It's specifically where the vacants are. And the vacants historically have been vacant. Up until extremely recently, vacants just did not get rehabbed. Yeah. And to the extent that that's barely starting to happen now with incredible work from DHCD, that's not feeding meaningfully through to our data yet. So I can actually say with some level of confidence that just by the nature of our methodology, it's not even particularly conservative, it's just history. By the nature of that historical methodology, we are not assuming revenue from vacants in our baseline assumptions. And I wanted to kind of just speak a little bit more broadly to sort of like your lead into the question, and that's that inherently there is a risk in any TIF from the city locking away its revenue. And one way that in the past, like you said, that we've mitigated that is we say, well, let's keep it to a geographical area. Of course, if that geographical area happens to be on the waterfront, you can have a whole lot of debate, as we have in the city for many years, about would we really have gotten this revenue? And that's why we have our external advisors to do a very rigid but-for test for us. In this non-contiguous TIF, again, it's not non-contiguous, not meaning, oh, it's just anywhere. Non-contiguous meaning specifically defined by vacancy. We have one of the strongest, probably the strongest case for a but-for that we've ever seen. We are definitely not locking away revenue that we would have gotten but for this program. So whatever safety loss you have by moving out of an area on a map, you gain a tremendous amount by tackling where the vacancy is, where the revenue never was and never would have been but for this program.
All right, thank you.
I think we can go to question.
Sure. I want to ask anything about numbers.
Microphone, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're good. Pull it closer.
I want to ask anything about numbers.
You can.
The legal construct of this is a TIF, and there should be no recourse other than to the pledged properties, correct?
Correct.
Any incremental income. Now, because there is no special tax in the event that there is a problem, the obligor is housing and development, correct?
It's the city of Baltimore.
All right, or it's the city of Baltimore. It was the same thing. I have two concerns, and I know the legal construct. How will the rating agencies perceive this? And two, and more importantly, in my mind, how will the bond vigilantes look at it?
I like that terminology, the
Well,
bond
that's what they are.
vigilantes.
And Michael certainly knows this. That's what they've
Yeah.
been called for years, or the bond vigilantes. They bring discipline to this market.
They do.
So you don't have to answer that today, but I do have a request. We recently went through a study done by, I think is it pronounced Sanami?
Sanami.
Okay, he referenced the Prague study that we paid for, which increased our ability to issue GOs up to $120 million, which is a significant amount of money. And in that presentation, as you'll recall, we all talked a lot about red lines. I just like to, and these bonds are outstanding for, I believe, 30 years? Is that, yes, that's the term that's in this document. They're outstanding for 30 years. I'd just like to see if Prague can put it in their model, how this affects the red lines. I think it's a reasonable question. We're adding significant.
So when the Prague study was ongoing, I actually had some discussions directly with the Prague team about this.
Good.
This has definitely been on our mind and on our radar. The goal of the Prague study was to figure out what we could do for general obligation bonds, and I will always take the position that general obligation bonds are separate from TIF bonds, and the industry supports me on that.
Well, but you're not a bond vigilante.
I'm not a bond vigilante, but for what it's worth, revenue-backed bonds are inherently in a class of their own, and that is understood by the industry. The ratings agencies which we talk to about this at least once a quarter always put GO in one bucket and TIFs in another. That's not to say that it doesn't matter, but by the time that you're looking at total obligations, there is a formula that the vigilantes use. Usually they will pile in everything. They will pile in utilities, even though they're inherently separate. They will pile in pension and healthcare obligations. And then when you pile all those things in, yes, there is a universe, and that universe for the city of Baltimore looks on the order of about $5 billion. That's what our kind of total obligations are. It is a valid question to ask of if there is a red line in that universe, but for context, we've done TIFs historically in Baltimore time and time again, and we're always paying off old TIFs as we're entering into new
We've
ones.
always had a special tax.
Yes, the TIFs never were, the TIFs, that, I mean, the reason I always understood why you treat them separately than the GEO bonds is because at the end of the day, the TIFs were never, ever, ever coming back for us to be the ones paying for them if the Delta didn't support.
So,
yeah, but this is not, but that's not true in this particular case.
It is legally true in this case as well. The city is not obligated to pay back these TIFs if the property tax
Mike,
revenue does not material.
Not legally obligated. I think I said that at the outset. I understand the legal construct. And Commissioner Kennedy, in the responses to Mr. Tsunami's questions, some of which I thought were really excellent, stressed the point that it's non-recourse. In the real world, and that's what I'm worried about. The real world.
Sure,
I'm a bond trader.
No, of course,
You know, I make money. Increasing 10. I mean, I'm not a bond trader.
What I would say to that is
10
that
basis points on $5 billion bucks. That's a lot of money.
what I would say is that in the real world, the TIFs that we've done, even though they have, by the way, not always, but sometimes been supported by special taxing districts. If those special taxing districts fail, we are under just as much soft pressure as we would be under this TIF or any other program. There isn't a fundamental difference between this TIF and other TIFs from a legal perspective.
Well, anyway, that was not my question. I'd just like to know what red lines we approach issuing 30-year bonds under this program.
Well, no, actually, but just a quick point to what you just said. We've never had a situation that I'm aware of where the Delta was not there and the special tax did not get paid.
I think we had.
Or did we have a situation where somebody didn't pay, and so the bondholders actually?
No. The bondholders always got paid, but we had. It was EBDI, but for the Casey Foundation, that would have been a fiasco.
The Casey Foundation paid EBDI's bond payments?
They bought the bonds.
They bought the bonds.
Some of the bonds.
Yeah.
Okay. So for all practical purposes,
I'm not opposed.
the city,
I'm not opposed to this.
Yeah,
I
but
just wanna
the
make
city
sure
has the city has never been in a position where the Delta didn't go up, but the special tax didn't come through, and so we had to decide: do we want to keep our reputation strong and pay extra out of pocket, or not? We've never been faced with that choice, it sounds like, but we have been faced with the Delta not going up. I'm just saying,
Poplar being the best example.
is there somewhere buried in these calculations projections of what it would cost us if the Delta doesn't go up as much as we expect it to?
So it's a very good question. I think I can add a couple of helpful clarifications. Okay, again, on the city's TIF policies that the Board of Finance adopted, in this program, it was a very thorough process. That policy says if it's a developer-sponsored TIF, we want a special tax. That's basically a way of making the developer back its promises. It says it's going to produce enough taxes, so it is, if it has to pay a special tax. The policy says if it's a city-sponsored TIF, that's not necessarily
We're the
requirement.
developer.
Exactly. And with affordable housing, you can realistically ask affordable housing, homeowners to pay. Okay, let me just.
All of that. That's
well, let me get so.
Okay.
So we it's not like we just said, okay, so it's different. We changed the structure of how these bonds are done to address that fact that we don't have a special tax, and we changed it in two very important ways. Okay. We're not issuing bonds until we already have property on the tax roll, okay? So now your policy, again, requires that we size the bonds for 125% coverage based on development in place or, that's underway, okay? So we're not issuing the first series of bonds until we see development that's already underway, already producing tax increment revenue, providing 125% coverage. Now, if you look at all those developer TIFs, every single one of them was issued at the beginning of development. It's what we call a dirt bond, raw land, okay? So you had that risk of the developer producing the development. We're not taking that risk here because we don't have the special tax. We're requiring that there be development in place or underway when we issue the bonds. Then when we issue those bonds, that money is going to the next number of units, okay? We're not counting the tax increment from those
Where's
additional.
the first money coming from? I'm sorry, I've been thinking that this was the first money.
No.
This is the,
So look, the whole thing says, the TIF money is not available until there's a use and occupancy permit,
Correct.
period.
yes.
So where's the first money?
So the first money is money that we've been spending. It's money that we've been utilizing, and it's been money that we've already
The first round
put
is the
in.
stuff we're already doing.
So it's what we've already been doing.
it's the 350
So it's the
houses that you're
350
gonna-
property,
I understand
it's
that.
the first bunch.
I really should
Bunch
have
is the
come up
technical term for.
No, this is your.
Bunches,
No, I
this is the,
understand.
this is what we
summarize
talked,
the
yeah, we
concept.
did go over it a little bit when, at the last meeting, Erica was
Yeah,
here.
right, yeah.
So
That's not my
it
question.
is,
I just want to know.
the first group of properties actually is from 2023, from calendar year 2023. And that serves as the basis of the properties that have already received their use and occupancy permit, have already been able to move forward, have already, been gone from vacant to rehabilitated from the calendar year of 2023. So that increment is going to be starting, and then that creates the 125% coverage that Keenan mentioned, so that then we can issue the first tranche of bonds under the TIF.
I just want to add just a couple, I think, that goes to some of the questions. The structure, we changed the structure because we don't have a special tax. We're issuing bonds when we have proven development. That's actually a safer structure than a raw land bond backed by special tax. Now, we want that special tax. That's a strong feature. But that's actually riskier because you still have raw land, okay? If you have to collect a special tax on raw land, that's riskier than having completed development. For example, we just got a bond rating from Moody's for TIF bonds issued by the Howard County
That's
where
a
development was in
naked
place.
bond, yes.
Well,
But can you compare the demographics and the
No.
underlying
No,
economics
we
of Howard
understand.
County with Baltimore City?
No, we understand.
I think that's somewhat disingenuous.
Well, I don't think so, because I had extensive conversations with Moody's. I submitted the application. I'm the one who worked with Moody's. They liked a lot about the Howard County bonds, but what they liked the
One of the
most,
richest counties in the country.
what they liked the most is that the development was already in place.
Yeah.
Okay, so they weren't taking that development risk. Okay, so this structure where we're issuing bonds subsequent is actually a strong structure because we don't have a special tax, but we're not looking to raw land. And remember, when we issue that first series of bonds of $20 million, that's now going to additional new development, new units, and we're not even including that tax increment when we do the 125% sizing. So it's all going to be additional tax increment over and above the 125%. And one last point I want to make. When the bond rating agencies look at this, as Michael has said, and he's right, there's a difference in revenue bonds and GO bonds. Okay, they know that, they look at that. It's very important in the difference in how this is structured. And the fact that those revenues are already in place to pay for the bonds, it's just a material difference in how they rate and evaluate the bonds compared to GO bonds.
Let me just, I have no problem with this at all. The construction financing is coming from somewhere else. There'll be a use and occupancy permit by the time you use any TIF money. You have a large debt service reserve fund. You have a large capitalized interest fund. And the institutional investors will look at all this and make their decision. This is just a revenue bond. We have sewer bonds, we have water bonds, and that's where we have here. And I just really think the issue here is the structure. What I'm more concerned about is the implementation, quite frankly, in terms of where you come from. Because I noticed in one of the documents that there were, you'd asked for 70 or 80 people more that you didn't get. I don't have any trouble with the financing. I do think that we have a real issue with respect to the implementation, and we need to make sure you've got the people and the resources to implement it.
I think that question is for DHCD, but I'll steal a little bit of the...
Hold on one second.
I think Bob said a lot that I'm in agreement with, but going back to Fred's first question, it's just one of the most important questions of all of this. If you look down the road, and if the Bragg report was going to be updated, what would it say? And Fred's question was, can we just get them to do that update? And just so that everybody is not overly concerned, some of the projections that are in the Muni CAP's report didn't just talk about cost, it talked about revenue. So if Bragg was going to look at it, they wouldn't just look at the issuance of the 150, but the revenue that it would generate. So, but since these tranches are going to come back to the Board of Finance,
Yes, sir.
You want to give the Board of Finance what they need so that your meetings don't drag out 3 hours to get to the main point,
Yes, sir.
which is...
Well, thank you. Now you're stealing my thunder a little bit. What I was going to suggest as an answer to Mr. Amistad's question was, we right now are not taking out any debt. Right now, this is just a legal construct. We will be coming to you for permission to take out debt, including the first tranche, which this is not that yet. This is not the first tranche yet.
I understand.
And in coming to you for the first tranche, I would be happy to see what we can do in providing exactly that kind of analysis. I think the points that you raised are absolutely the points that are on my mind for the different balances of where the red lines are and how they work. I have reason based on what I've seen to feel confident where the first tranche is likely about $20 million. Our total burden is about $5 billion. Given the revenue generating capacity of this work, we are likely in a very good place. However, I definitely hear the board on wanting to see that information, and I would commit to providing that information when we come back for the actual debt tranches.
One more question, not numbers. First question wasn't numbers, this isn't numbers. Your initial program of $1.5 billion is going to be renovating some 1,600 houses? The way I do the math, is that correct? Well, okay, if it's more, so be it. But tell me where you're getting the construction inspectors that are approving draws. Do you having architects supervising this work? Sure. This is real money. This is the cost of the new bridge. I thought about it last night. The cost of this is the cost of the new bridge.
I wanted to...
Does the staff exist? I saw you applied for...
See, that's the point I made.
Yeah,
I don't have any problem with the financing.
Yeah.
No problem with the need for this. I mean, we need to go back to that issue.
There's
too.
no question about
But the issue is implementation with, all of that and
Yeah, absolutely. So the implementation question is a great one, and I'll lead off and then pass it to Commissioner Kennedy. My lead off is that I have seen DHCD reconfigure themselves internally over the last several years to begin this work already. That's why we're in the place we're in, where we've already have hundreds of properties rehabbed. So the staffing at DHCD already looks different than it did a few years ago. There is a larger plan to continue staffing up, but we are not at point zero DHCD worked internally within their own budget to reallocate people specifically to this project, and we're already at about 20 or so people that are just going to be doing this work and growing. So just a little bit of context that we know, and we are building that team as we speak. But I'll pass it to Commissioner
According to
Kennedy.
the schedule that you provided, or Keenan provided, after the initial 300 houses, you're going to be doing 800 houses, correct? In series of, how many people do you need to supervise the construction draws? This is real money for 800 houses.
So
Crude math is inspectors going to visit a site every 2 years?
No, so a couple things just in terms of process that I want to be, specific to the TIF and the TIF dollars and the operationalizing of the TIF dollars, and then, broader as well. So specific to the TIF dollars, we are able to operationalize the TIF funding and the reimburse the application from the developers for the funds, the grant agreements to those developers for the properties and the funds, and then the evaluation and using our existing staff, which we are already doing. And we are basing it off of the work in the programs that we do for developer incentives through our home funding, through our Affordable Housing Trust Fund, through our other GEO bonds, et cetera. We do not actually have to perform on these properties related to the TIF construction. We're not doing construction draw inspections as related to all of the TIFs. The city DHCD, after it's on a reimbursable basis, the work is completed, and then we receive the invoice and the backup information, and sometimes we'll need to do an inspection. The developer provides all of that backup information. We review that to make sure that the expenditures and the costs are allowable under what the TIF is allowed to cover. And then we submit that, we do the perusal of that we submit it to MuniCap. MuniCap does a second analysis of the expenditures, and then it's approved for payment. It goes to Janelle's office, and payment is made.
Is that an independent process?
It is an independent process. We have done and will do construction inspections. We actually have field staff. DHCD is close to 400 staff members strong, and that is one thing that I'll build off of what Michael, Director Moxton stated, is that we've done some reconfiguration. We've looked at where the staff needs to be and what we need to do. We do on-site inspections for different properties for compliance management. We have a compliance division outside of also our kind of processing division already in place. But we're not needing to do construction draw inspections because we're not providing the initial construction financing loans.
My only point is to be helpful. I want to make sure that you have adequate staff.
I appreciate that very much. And, we have worked with the administration, like we've had prioritized a number of positions that we needed. We've identified that and have those 20 positions now on staff.
You said you hired 6 lawyers, as I recall.
There was additional 6 attorneys. We have.
I'm not sure that's going to help any, but.
No, it helps. Actually, in order to meet our goal of.
We need lawyers. We need lawyers because we have to go to the court with vacant property owners.
What he thinks about that.
Well, yeah, outside of the theoretical discussion about attorneys and
well, the $3.2 million in the cost of issuance of $150 million of TIF bonds is not theoretical or insignificant.
No, that is not.
But it does provide for a very appreciative set of lawyers.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
I think that what I will say too, thank thank you to the board for this deep discussion. We know that this is a very innovative thing, a solution to a problem that has existed for a long, long time in the city, but also just to the work of the folks at DHCD, especially those folks who are inspecting houses that have been renovated. I can personally attest, I had to delay moving into my house 2.5 months because the inspector said, no, this isn't going to cut it, to the person who was selling me the house. And I think that we have to continue, and we will, Bob, continue to bolster their staff, both on the inspection side, but on the legal side as we go through this, because we know we're going to need more people. And also, I think it's important in this moment, too, to note the systems upgrades that we are going. So we're going to, by the end of this year, have a new permit system. It'll be electronic. We'll be in the 21st century finally in the city of Baltimore fully, and synchronizing with all the other departments, because we know how important every single step and every single process as we go towards ultimately ending the vacant crisis in Baltimore. None of us will be on this board when it happens, but they'll be able to look back and see when it started, and that we did it in a very innovative way that hopefully now other cities around the country will be measuring themselves up to.
Or even on this mortal plane. The if I
Speak
could,
for yourself, Bill. I plan on being here in 15 years.
I was. If I could just be persnickety again for a minute, I'm looking at the slide that's up, and again, I'm referring back to one of Fred's original comments. Dollars of total investment for $1 of TIF bond city contribution. That says $20 based on a $150 million TIF and a $3 billion total investment. But that's really kind of disingenuous, because as we've discussed in all of this, $1 billion of that $3 billion is infrastructure, which is money out. So it's not money in, and the TIF is money in. So it's not that's not a fair comparison. And also, of the other $2 billion, we really only have firm projections on $1.5 billion, and of that $1.5 billion, 150 is the TIF, but the other 150 is also already projected to come from the city in some other fashion that hasn't been rolled out yet. So, I don't mean this to be
persnickety.
Well, no, I do mean it to be persnickety. I don't mean it to be.
That's very pertinent.
I don't mean it to be pejorative.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not saying it's a bad thing for us to be putting the $150 million in, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing to only have the leverage be 6-to-1 instead of 20-to-1. I'm like, even if it was 3-to-1, it would still be better than 1. Right? So, but I'm saying that when you have these really grand numbers out there, it gets people going in a direction that may make it harder to explain things to them later.
Mr. Comptroller, your point is well taken. I think that in designing this presentation, we wanted to highlight for people to understand that this is the spark that lights the fire. This is the first step. This was how we got the state to consider putting their piece in, the idea that the city would do something and the state would do something. But what's more than that is this is how the private market is ultimately going to move. I would
think the private market would be especially persnickety about this.
I absolutely take the point that there are things in here that are aspirational, and that we should be mindful in how we talk about them and in how we set expectations.
Aspirational is a good way to put
Yes.
it.
I mean, it's,
I think
look, no one's arguing
Yeah.
with the objective here.
Absolutely.
Apple pie is aspirational.
I will say that what we have in front of the board is very real. It is a TIF construct with tangible properties attached to it. I would say that there's something that we want to keep telling the public about how this is different than what we've done in the past.
Michael.
With that being said, I hear your point.
Let's make it realistic, and while it's aspirational, let's not raise hopes. I was here when we approved, and Janelle was here too, when we approved Poppleton, and I heard all the promises in the world, and my reaction on Poppleton was, God, this sounds like EBDI all over again. And it's not a nice situation.
Kind of is on the other side.
So
don't
EBDI has a lot more built up.
don't oversell this.
No, I hear you, but I do have to say, as much as we're still paying for the mistakes of the past, there is...
It's not a mistake. Out of EBDI, a kid's got a new school, so that's not a mistake.
There is truly a momentum to these things. It is true that people jump in when they know that something's happening. But truly, understood. Even at face value, even at what this is, which is the state's commitment to this project and what we're in front of the board for right now from the city, we're still talking about $1 billion as opposed to the next to nothing that has been in this before. And I hear you on that we should be concrete and talking about what we have.
You're talking the FSK Bridge, the reconstruction. That's what this represents. That's the same cost.
Any other questions from members of the board? Well, if not, I will consider a motion for this item.
I move it.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Thank you. This item has been approved. Other business before the board. Is there any other business before the board today? There is none.
My laptop had my agenda and it ran out.
Like it did not. Thank you. Our next meeting is on Monday, August the 26th at 3 p.m. Thank you very much.